us to do that in some way with their behavior change long term. I'm just wondering how you study the outcomes of the work that you're doing, like the impact. So kind of two questions, the impact and then, I guess, how that logic shift happens in someone's brain. We're sort of talking about like a new universe where you just, I would love that to work. Or no one ever considered, problems where they chase after. How do you make that everyone's difference?
I can't answer that question, I don't think yet, because this is all new work for me as well. But one of the parts of the project that I didn't discuss very well is that students had to figure out if, say, the problem was cigarette litter. They had to go into all different types of research and figure out why do people litter, right? And so it took us into psychological, philosophical, behavioral, all different types of research to figure it out, and then developed a rhetorical intervention based on that prior research. And so, I guess part of the sustainable development in terms of rhetoric is relying upon all different types of fields and what they have to offer in terms of why humans behave in particular ways, and then what do we know about language systems that can potentially alter behavior as well, and can we put those together in some sort of way that could result in have a successful result. So I think will these things work will come out in the long term.
And following up on that question, in your interventions, how do you disentangle between the rhetorical part, the historic part, and the visual part? The students were showing a sticker, the sticker had a look to it, the news pieces that you were showing us to not particularly attractive young men smoking a cigarette. So how much is it the image, and I think you touched upon that a little bit in your presentation, and how much is the rhetorical message?
I guess I'm not quite understanding the question. Sorry. Can you rephrase it? Maybe I'm just not hearing.
Oh, maybe. No. What I'm saying is that when you transmit a message, there is the words and there is the image.
Sure.
And there was a lot of image content in the messages that you were putting out there for people to, not to litter the cigarette butts. And I wonder how you will go ahead to disentangle the role of the image and the role of the words.
So upon reflection after the creation of those messages, what could be? I mean, I don't know if you can disentangle the role of the image when it's combined with words, because the words are helping shape your impression of the image. So I'm not sure you can. One thing to note is that all those images that were with the published paper, the op-eds and those things, those were chosen by the editors of the paper. So the students didn't have control over those. And so that still adds to their, does things to their message, but wasn't necessarily their intent. Which doesn't really matter in terms of message reception, but it's important to note that more reflects the biases of the publication than the students right now.
There's a naive question quickly that follows up on that. Is imagery then part of the rhetoric?
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I expect.
Yeah, like the image then becomes part of the message. Unfortunately, in this case, the students didn't have control over the image.
Yeah.
Right, and so if they put, two people happily smoking or whatever, engaging in a, fun conversation, enjoying their cigarette outside with that, don't litter your cigarette butts, that might, promote some sort of incongruency in an audience, right? Like it looks like they're having a good time, but yet you're telling us don't engage in this behavior or whatever. So, unfortunately, just due to, I guess, how papers operate, at least the way they operated with our students, they didn't have control over those, the rhetorical impact of those images.
Additional questions?
I had a question for the first two speakers on the, you had a slide, Nicole, with a quote that said that communication is more art and strategy than science, and in the presentation that Mark did, there wasn't really any reference to science. I think this dichotomy is a big problem. Communication is certainly a very important thing. We're trying to change behavior, change people's willingness to have collective restrictions put on them. And the things you're saying, we have different ideas about how to change behavior. You have hypotheses about moderators and mechanisms through which you can change behavior and people's preferences. Those seem like scientific questions to me. I think the problem is that the scientists have the idea about what's the technology, and we use riparian buffers, and we use these apps, and then the humanists have this idea of these images, and these words will influence, and they kind of feel their views as they're separate areas. There seems to be a need to sort of apply scientific principles to the same idea. Disentangling the image and the words, that can be done. I mean, you can think about running a randomized experiment where people are exposed to different messages, with images, without images, with words, different kinds of words, and seeing how behaviors change, or at least stated beliefs change. So I wonder if, for both of you, do you ever think about how you might test some of these hypotheses about how art and rhetoric influences people's behavior?
There's been a great disservice in creating a separate category of creative research. I mean, what research is not creative, right? And I think one way we can take a step towards fixing this and you know, addressing your question is, let's bring these humanists, these artists, these different people together at the beginnings of projects. Don't bring the artist and designer at the end of the project, right? Research communication will be enriched, and the actual quality of the research itself will be enriched by having a diverse group of creative thinkers involved from the very outset, framing the problems themselves.
Yeah, there's plenty of people, of my colleagues in my department who do communication studies, more science research, right, would test messages on people. So there is that type of research. Rhetoricians, we tend to look at texts that have already been produced. And so the tradition of rhetoric comes from studying speech. And so we are better at thinking strategically about things like contextual factors and how that will change a person's or a text's ability to be persuasive. And so I think all those things combined are what we need, right? People doing the types of message response, collecting that type of data, and also the people who are looking at different creative ways to create texts, such as a rhetorical critic looking after the text is created to then think about text generation. So, and yeah, I apologize for creating that dichotomy between science and the humanities. Certainly, the two have more in common than that.
Okay, maybe one more question before we break. Lizzie?
Well, likewise, going further on that point, knowing what types of research are going on, I really enjoyed your Mark's presentation, because I also see these as questions that as a scientist could be addressed. So pairing with people, not just bringing in the artists and design people from the beginning in research study of the sciences that needs to be communicated, but bring a social or natural scientist in a humanities project from the beginning, so we can study some of its consequences. It'd be nice to establish more of those connections. More Coke cans than that.
Any response? Everybody's hungry, right? Okay, well, a few instructions. Thank you guys one more time.